So once again, welcome to today's monthly seminar engagement. It's really a pleasure to have all of you on board joining us. I'll just be doing a brief introduction of myself. My name is Leah Aoko. I'm the Policy Development Specialist at the Africa Research and Impact Network. And it's really been a learning experience that I enjoy every day. And so I'll be introducing ARIN, what ARIN is about just briefly. It's a network of over 200 researchers and policymakers across African countries. So really the aim of ARIN is to give opportunity to early career researchers to expand their expertise and experience in various topics and key areas of work that we engage in. And also ARIN provides a peer review platform where the best research and impact practices from different African contexts are shared. So we are keen on looking at how best practices can be contextualized to the African continent and how we can improve socioeconomically, as a continent, and for practices that can be implemented even on an international scale. So ARIN really seeks to identify and leverage on key research talents and best project expenses to flexibly and innovatively contribute to Africa's research agenda and transformation. So key areas of work include innovation, climate change initiatives, disaster risk reduction in the urban setting. So we have done a lot of work around these areas, and we continue to expand our scope to other areas of interests that may engage early career researchers across the African region. And so ARIN supports contextual knowledge systems and learnings. It develops models and best practices, as I have mentioned, and supports the capacity of individuals and institutions on transformative research. So when we look at membership, one may be wondering, how can I join this really impactful network? Our membership has, policymakers from across the continent, talented researchers, early career researchers. And so just having a model of mentorship, within the organization has really been instrumental and impactful for us. So that really is the membership of ARIN. Our regional focal points are in East Africa, Southeastern Africa, Southern Africa, Western Africa, Central and Francophone, and diaspora even. So the network has really expanded and continues to expand across this regional focal points. We also partner with institutions and stakeholders depending on the projects that we are implementing. So just to recap a bit, that we focus on technology and innovation, sustainable development initiatives, climate change and energy, cities and resilience, agriculture and forestry. So if you look closely at these key thematic areas, you realize that they are instrumental in achieving the sustainable development goals and achieving the African agenda at large. So we are really passionate about our work and about research, and we are looking forward to having this monthly series really as a platform to bring on board expertise, people with experience from different organizations that are able to tell us this is what works when you are looking to apply for funding. This is what does not work when you're looking to apply for funding. So really that correlation is something that is very, very important, and something that we look to enlighten ourselves and also other participants on. And so having said that, I'll just introduce our speaker for today that is coming to us from IDRC. And we are really privileged to be having him. We have engaged with him on a number of projects, including the knowledge translation framework that we are working on, that is being funded by IDRC in partnership with the East African community. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Paul Okiira Okwi. He will tell us the correct pronunciation, but he is the Senior Program Specialist of IDRC in Nairobi. has over 20 years of international experience in development research, program management, policy engagement, capacity development in sub-Saharan Africa, vast expertise in development and policy issues, having worked at ILRI, the World Bank, and Makerere University. So really his expertise spans across all those sectors that we are looking to learn about today. So in IDRC over the past 12 years, Dr. Okwi's work has had a significant impact on policy change. He has been instrumental in organizing and engaging and leading even in the production of relevant, timely, analytical, sound, and reliable policy advice for countries. So he's a respected thought leader, and thought leadership is really what ARIN is about. So it's our pleasure to have him as a thought leader who has published extensively and in rated journals in economic related fields and participated in more than 50 research projects worth more than 60 million US dollars. That's a lot of money. He surely has something to tell us about competency in research grant writing, the donor and researcher perspective. So if you're here wondering why those research grants you've been applying for have not been going through, this is the correct forum for you and probably for your colleagues, just to learn from the expert, as it were, on competency in research grant writing, the donor and researcher perspective. So at this juncture, I'd like to invite Dr. Okwi, if you're on board. I will be happy to stop sharing my screen so that you can take over and just address us on this matter. And if you have questions or comments, kindly reserve them for the chat section, or after his presentation, we'll definitely have a Q&A session. Karibu sana, Dr. Okwi. Welcome to the engagement. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, Leah. Good afternoon, participants. Thank you very much for that introduction, Leah. And I don't promise to provide solutions to all your questions, but I'll just provide some snapshots on what are the expectations and probably what are the kind of challenges that Southern-based researchers face in terms of competing for research grants through various organizations. So I will take you through a number of processes, ideas, and welcome questions at some point to enable us try to balance in terms of what kind of research proposal are you writing and to whom. So first, I want to appreciate ARIN for organizing this very, very important webinar. Very supportive in terms of addressing some of the questions that we on the granting side sometimes ask ourselves. Why are our scientists not presenting quality proposals? Do they lack the competencies? Do they lack the facilities? Is it the institutional challenges? Or what is the problem? So I will try to address this from my experience, having been involved in research while at Makerere University and at ILRI. I competed for research grants, lost a number of them, got some of them. Then I moved on to work at the World Bank and IDRC. And here now, I switched sides. I was now on the granting side and looking at the proposals that were coming in, and I should say, able to understand and explain some of the challenges that were constraining my own growth as a researcher. So I have supported think tanks through the think tank initiatives, building their research capacity. I've also done regular programming. I've developed donor partnerships, and I've worked in a number of government projects. So using these various exposure channels, I should say I have some level of informational background that should be helpful to an upcoming researcher in terms of what to do in when applying for research grants. Now, before I get into the real depth of the matter, let me just give a brief outline of what is IDRC, just so that you understand when I get into the deeper context of the issue. So IDRC is a granting organization created by the Parliament of Canada in 1970. And we basically support research in developing countries. Emphasis developing countries, and why we want to promote growth and development. So that is why we look at how to develop local solutions, but we also emphasize that leadership for this research should be led by researchers from the Global South. So you will actually see that for IDRC, all our projects, the project lead is from the Global South. Never is it from the Global North unless special circumstances. So we do this by supporting local organizations to generate evidence that is relevant to their context. Relevant to their context. I'll reemphasize that, which is a very critical thing in terms of proposal writing. How relevant is your work to the context in which you are in? So we provide financial resources, we provide advice, sometimes we work with research organizations, develop proposals, projects. We do training to researchers in developing countries through organizations like the African Research Economic Consortium. And we also encourage knowledge sharing, which is more of another critical point of emphasis with the policymakers, with the researchers, and with the communities. So how do we work? Like I said, we give the leadership to the Southern researchers. We accept partnerships between researchers in the South and the North. For example, researchers from the University of Nairobi can partner with the Oxford University. That's acceptable in as much as or as long as the lead researcher is from the University of Nairobi in this case, for example. We also do linkages between researchers and policymakers and decision makers. And the reason here is to build the skills of the different categories. In terms of the institutions, we provide that technical capacity, the individuals, we improve their research skills, analytical skills. But why are we unique? Again, we use our local staff in the regional offices for purposes of context. Like I said, context matters. So the local staff who are based in the different regional offices have their eyes and ears on the ground. And these are the people who usually review the proposals that come in from the wider community. Quickly again, how do we do our granting? We have several modalities. We have what we call calls for proposals, competitive grants, which is the main approach. Here, what happens is we send out a call for proposals and people compete. You can imagine the last call that we had about a month ago, we had almost 1,600 people submitting, research organizations submitting proposals. So to be among the top 10 or 20 of this, you really need to have focused your proposal and given it the strength that is required. So in the call for proposals, we have the open calls, which like I said, are very competitive, but we also have the closed calls. Now the closed calls are, for example, we say ARIN, University of Nairobi, PEP, and University of Johannesburg, or so. 5 organizations give us proposals, we're funding you maybe 3 out of the 5. So those ones compete amongst themselves based on a certain criteria. But we also have what we call the solicited proposals. In this case, for example, I can come to ARIN and say, we are interested in studying transition to low carbon energy use in Africa or in Kenya. Can you give us a proposal, having understood that ARIN is strong in that area? So we work with you to develop that proposal, and then we provide you the funding. But there is also the other side of it, which is the unsolicited proposals, where, again, using the example of University of Kenyatta, or Kenyatta University comes in and says, we discovered that the political situation in Kenya, for example, today, is having a significant impact on youth consumption of what we want to consider. And then, of course, internally, we also have some competitive processes. Now, that is what the skeleton of what IDRC is and how we manage our research projects. Now, I won't get into the main issues on what basically are we looking at when you are evaluating a proposal. Now, the first thing that I would want to put on the table is understand your donor or the one who is sending out the call, the grantor or the person the institution putting out the resources. By getting into, if it is their website or looking more back into their background, what are the more specific areas of interest are they working in? Behind the scenes, there are certain drivers of what a good proposal will be by institution. For example, IDRC today will say, there is no proposal that we can fund that does not address gender issues. So you might come in with a very strong scientific proposal, but if it does not mention how it will integrate gender in it, it will not be called a good proposal, and you will lose out definitely on that. So that's why I emphasize, before you even start writing the proposal, get into the organization profile. What are they? Who are they? What do they do? What do they emphasize? What is their strategic plan? What is their strategy like? And what is their ambition in terms of goal? And now, once you understand that, at the time you respond to the call, you know exactly how to phrase it, because you know where the catchwords are, what are the catch points. And here I want to be categorically specific. We have two kinds of organizations. We have the scientific organizations, real scientific, that want proposals that are high, for example, in modeling and very rigorous, robust proposals. Then we also have those that are development-oriented, maybe Rockefeller, IDRC, CDO, and others. These are project organizations that will look at proposals that are relevant in the sense of having impact, change, influencing policy, influencing the way lives happen. Whereas the typical scientific one might just want to say, we are on a cutting edge development of innovative methods in a particular area, without critical emphasis on how that will change the way things are done. Now, that is something, again, you need to be very critical about. Are you responding to a proposal that is scientifically strong or development oriented in the sense? Both of them require rigor, of course. Now, what makes a good proposal? The first thing, like I said, is we look for relevance. In the call or in the process of soliciting the proposals, we look for relevance. And the first thing we do is, does your proposal provide a detailed rationale for that proposed research? How relevant is it in terms of responding to what the grantor or the funder has asked for? Does it clearly describe the importance of the issue at hand? And then how important is it in terms of the local and regional context? So in most cases, we look back at the context. The first question I'd ask myself is, let's say there's a call for proposals on the impact of the Russian war on African economies. So you are putting out a proposal. And the first thing you want to look at is, how relevant is this in the context of Kenya? Number one, access to food, pricing of fuel products, access to international markets or whatever it is. Now, once you point out that and you're able to demonstrate that in actual sense, because of the war, for example, Kenyans are faced with food scarcity or prices of products have gone up, and this is affecting the local communities. Then now the question we go back to is, how important is that? Yes, it's affecting the communities. How important is it? Then you could probably say, yes, the issue is it's affecting women more than the men. That's a very important aspect because we know gender, for example, to us at IDRC is a critical thing. So you are saying there was a general affecting the Kenyan economy, but more focused on women. The second thing in terms of relevance is the research questions and the objectives. Many times we tend to not think deeply about what are the kind of questions we are asking and what are the objectives. Sometimes you find people going back to the call document and picking those same research questions and objectives and putting them back in the proposal on the concept note. That is not right. You should actually try to rephrase your research questions to address the relevant issues in the aspects that you have looked at in terms of the local context. The second important point that we look at, for example, is the quality and rigor in terms of the methodology and research design. Now, research design, for example, how do you propose to apply to implement the project in terms of your conceptualization? Who are you partnering with? A good proposal, for example, to IDRC today is one that will bring an academic or a research-based organization, an implementing organization, civil society, a policy organization, policymakers and government, and maybe private sector. Now, if you can bring those, definitely your methodology is going to be not just in terms of an academic aspect, but you're going to bring in an applied approach. So your proposal should outline the methods for analysis, for data collection, data knowledge translation, and that should be rigorously presented and in a very concise way. Again, writing too much does not help. Being very precise, proposals of 10, 15 pages are better than those of 50 pages or 100 pages. The third aspect is the impact. Does this proposal clearly outline the potential to achieve impact? Does it outline the potential to inform policy? Does it outline the potential to inform practice? And here we are talking about real positive impact in terms of if it is a policy change. We have had an innovation in the utilization of production of Irish potatoes in Nyandarua, and they have come up with a new technology, a new technique, which can consume all the products from the stems to the leaves to the peelings to the potatoes to the starch. How transformative is that in the community? Or if it is a vocational education kind of research project, how transformative is it in terms of curricula or otherwise? The fourth aspect is what kind of learning can we have from this project? Does your project identify strategies for adapting to changing environments, for example? If it is a climate change proposal, does it kind of provide some foresight, futuristic work to show that in the next 10 years, 5 years, this is what the position will be? You also need to kind of show what your plans are for monitoring and evaluation, your plans for knowledge sharing, plans for dissemination. Most proposals that, for example, we receive stop at very good methodology, relevance, and impact, but do not show how this is going to be used. In that case, the proposal is simply saying we are going to be shelved after this. But you should show that when this work is finally completed, we intend to engage private sector actors in the following way. We intend to engage policymakers in the following way. We intend to monitor the utilization of this knowledge by having focus group discussions or whatever it is. But the idea I'm putting forward is you need to have a good monitoring, evaluation, and learning plan. Another core aspect is the team. We look at the team. Most of the time, IDRC does not deal with individuals, we deal with organizations, institutions. But when you're submitting a proposal, look for very strong teams in terms of composition, in terms of integration of multidisciplinary teams, for example. If it is a development project, if it's a climate change project, if it is an agricultural project, try to make sure that you are not the one person who knows gender, you're not the one person who does econometric modeling, you're not the same person who does the advocacy, you're not the same person who does implementation and all that. So team diversity is very, very important, and strength of the team. One thing which I'll repeat with time permitting is most of the time our researchers want to work in silos. We want to submit proposals individually because you want to eat alone, you want to be the champion, the bull in the crowd. It does not help you. Partnerships really work better, like I'll re-emphasize at some point. So formulation of a strong team is very, very important. The other aspect is on, which relates to the team, is the diversity and inclusion. Like I say, try to demonstrate who does what in your team. That strength of saying the gender component will be addressed by the Department for Gender in the University of Nairobi using the following experts who have the following strength. The econometric bits will be done by somebody from the Department of Economics or whatever it is. So that elaboration shows that you understand how the different parts are threads pulled together. And then the last two that I will talk about is ethical issues. You need to highlight, are there any ethical concerns? Maybe, for example, using children as study objects, subjects, or whatever it is. You need to have a clear ethical clearance process. We also look at your data management, which is linked to your methodology. And of course, the last one is the budget. Again, some people overlook this. When you're presenting the proposal, you focus more on the first pass and look at the budget as last. So when you present the budget, you simply say, we shall need $1 million to do this project. But your budget must be aligned with your objectives and the proposed activities. And we want to see that these justify the budget. So you provide detailed notes on each budget item if you're required in many cases. So that's in a nutshell what researchers should consider. One, the relevance, research quality, dissemination strategy, uptake opportunities, partnership building, knowledge translation, capacity building, and then also, the networks, whether you build the networks and how we put this. So all these need to be done right from the start of your project. Now, some very, very recent changes in many international organizations. Number one, when they call for projects, usually the emphasis will be what kind of partnerships do we have in this project. So a project proposal that, for example, says ARIN is a research-based organization, but we seek to work with an advocacy organization, which is National Women's Organization of Kenya, and the Ministry of Agriculture to implement this proposal. And you can definitely, if you are able, get information from even a letter of clearance from the Minister of Gender, Minister of Finance, to say this project is relevant and we give clearance to it as it will inform a number of our policy reforms or whatever it is. That kind of justification gives strength to the proposal, other than one that simply mentions it in passing. What I'm trying to say is, right from the start of conceptualization, try to map and engage policy people, implementation-based people. Number two is outreach, really. From the time of conceptualization, have a communications mapping. Who are the kind of stakeholders that you're going to work with? What kind of relationships are you going to build? Who are the practitioners? All this should be part of your project design. If that is the nature of the project, I'm talking about the development kind of project proposals. And then, of course, you know that it's not how good your research proposal project is that matters. What is most important is how usable is it. Now, before I come to the last part, there are two parts where I want to talk about researchers versus donors. What are the different worlds in which they are in? Now, having been from the research side before I came to this other side of the table, number one, I know that we as researchers, first of all, generally tend to be a little slow and want to be very thorough sometimes. Now, that is a typical researcher, but in the global south, it's not necessarily the case. Most of the research proposals that we receive don't have that depth, that thoroughness. Why? Because the call for proposals is 1 month ahead, and then we wait 1 week to the end of the call is when we jump in to begin filling in the proposal. So you look at it and just say, okay, good topic, but depth, no, because this is something that is hurriedly written. And you don't want to get that kind of bias in the readers or a reviewer's perspective that, no, this is not something that was well written or well researched. We also tend to be more academic and very theoretical. Like I said, if I'm reviewing a proposal, I want to see whether it will have some impact. I want to see whether there will be potential for influencing the livelihoods of people. I'm probably less interested in the development of the supersonic theoretical approaches. That is for a different case. In this case, we're talking about a development proposal. We also look at, as researchers, we want to look at counterintuitive results. We are quite careful. We want to have more focus on our qualifications. If you, just for your information, for example, there is kind of a shift in our focus from IDRC now, from more of university-based to think tanks, because university-based researchers tend to want to do work for purposes of qualification. When you ask them, after this project, is there a plan for uptake? No. I want to get my peer-reviewed publications and get promoted. A think tank-based researcher would be like, after this, what are you looking at? Yes, I'm looking at scaling up this project from 10 districts to 50 districts for purposes of larger impact. And so those are the kind of things we look out for. Now, from the researcher side, in Africa, for example, evidently we see that there are weaknesses in certain areas. Like I've said, in the depth of the proposal, the connectedness in terms of context. We also see that institutions do not support the researchers in many cases. We've had a number of institutions blacklisted because of poor project management, poor project administration. I will not mention them, but for example, a university submits a proposal and is blacklisted. Nobody will look at it because we know that when you give funds to that university, getting the outputs will be a total nightmare. So believe you me, however good your proposal is, if you are blacklisted, it's very difficult to get an acceptable proposal. Also, there are certain gaps, there are certain conditionalities that we on the funding side set. We want to, like I said, we are focusing on gender, we're focusing on advocacy, we're focusing on particular aspects. But be mindful that sometimes this is what determines whether you get the money or not. On the funders side, many times, just to let you know, these people are kind of overworked, they're hard pressed. So when I look at a proposal and the first paragraph is not as attractive to make me read the second one, I will get biased most likely. So I tend to have lots of pressure, but that pressure can be made more attractive in terms of focus of the proposal. The other thing I ask myself, does it work? If this proposal is funded, will it work? After 5 years, can I come back and do another evaluation and see that it has changed something? We also prefer common sense solutions. We don't prefer these supersonic hypothetical solutions. We want to see that an investment in rubber utilization in a certain area can change the lives of people. But another critical thing is that we are also driven by the incentives of the funders, the main organization. For example, IDRC focuses more on the Canadian foreign policy. What is that Canadian foreign policy? What are their interests? So you'll see that most of our calls are tied to that, climate change, energy, gender, agriculture, food security, and so on. So finally, I would like to say that, yes, our African scientists have the good competencies, the good skills, they can do the good proposals, but we need certain issues to improve significantly. Number one is the rigor, the focus, how inclusive are we, the depth. We compete against ourselves. We tend not to work as teams. So you find one department in a university is competing against another department. I had a case of a university in one country where two departments came together, didn't come together actually. We sent out a call to them. It was Department of, it was in social science and economics. I think it was history and something. So I reached out to the team and said, you guys, you know what? This is a big project, almost $1 million. I don't see why you in economics should write another one proposal and you in political science should write another proposal. Why don't you come together and do something solid and share it? They refused. And at the end of the day, of course, nobody got it. None got it. It went to a different group because they were weak in terms of the comprehensiveness. We face accountability challenges. The fear is sometimes our researchers, you grant money, the first transaction, 50% of $500,000, somebody has pocketed $200,000, the rest is history. It disappears. So you begin running after the person. So there's that challenge that we face from this other side, that is lack of delivery and accountability challenges. And then also our researchers really require a lot of supervision. I can tell you, for example, I have a project in South Africa, I will hardly have supervision challenges in UCT or whatever, because they tend to focus, they tend to deliver. I have a project in the University of Rwanda, Makerere University, University of South Sudan. Be sure that I will have supervision challenges. Delivery will not be on time, and that ruins our reputation. So that's why you find right from the word go, sometimes it's like there's a call, but our researchers do not compete favorably because of some of those things which come in hindsight. And the last but not least, sometimes networks matter. So as you work through, it's always important to build the networks with the funding partners, because if I see a proposal from ARIN and ARIN has presented very excellent work, there's tendency to have that bias, that ARIN is always good. Give them the proposal, give them the money. If I have worked with University of Masailand and they have always had challenges, from the word go, I see the proposal, I'll always say, maybe not, maybe yes. If money has disappeared in a project in the past 5 years, the chances are that I will say, no, I don't want to burn my fingers. So these are some of the issues that come up in preparation of grant proposals and why we tend to lose out. we don't have sometimes these challenges, which we can overcome by revisiting and working as teams. Sorry, I think spoken too long. Let me allow time for questions. Thank you so much, Leah, and the team for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Okwi, for that really insightful discussion. I'll now just open the floor straight away so that time does not catch up with us. I'll open the floor for questions or comments directed to Dr. Okwi on his presentation on the donor funders' perspective when it comes to research grants. So anyone with a question? Dr.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I must thank Dr. Paul for putting a lot of, actually, these are more of experience sharing. My name is Dr. Ali Aden from Umma University, and I thank ARIN for organizing this very important conversation. Dr. Ali, I just wanted you to shed your light on how the young scholars can really penetrate, because you have mentioned the importance of partnership. For example, instead of 3 or 4 scientists from the same institution writing different proposals, bringing it out together, that will really work well when there is established professors or scholar who can really coordinate that. How will that be overcome? For example, remember, we are from a very young universities, and let's say our networking with the, let's say, South African-based professors or German professors or American for that matter, it's really difficult to identify that particular top figure under the pyramid, so that top at the top is that experienced, well-established scholar. How can that problem be addressed? And thank you.
Can I take a number of questions, or you want me to answer one by one?
I think, Daktari, you can take a number of questions and then you can answer them, just noting them down. I'll take out the question from Paul Sando from Ghana. Please go ahead.
Yes, Doc, thanks so much for your presentation. Very excellent, straightforward. And I want to ask about, rejections of proposals, and how that can also possibly impact improvement. That hasn't gotten anything like that. Do you have an experience, and how can that really impact moving forward improvement?
All right. I believe, is there any other third question that can be addressed by Dr. Okwi? All right, Dr.
Okay.
Okwi, you can start with those ones. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Let me start with a question on the young scholars. How do you get into the research world without when you don't have the networks? I would say that like a child is born, has to crawl, has to learn how to walk, then run, then, it's the same in the research world. Unless you are a genius, it's really very difficult for you as a researcher who has just graduated, for example, with a master's or whatever it is, to come in and say, I am competing for a project with the Rockefeller Foundation also. It happens. But most of the time, the guidance that I give is through attendance of conferences and workshops and webinars, we create partnerships. And when you create the partnerships, these are the people you work with to submit proposals to the bigger level competitive calls. Now, remember, there are two types. There are funds that are given in small amounts, 10,000, 15,000, you can compete as an individual. That's a small grant. But if you're looking at the big grants over 500,000, 1 million, 300,000 or so, most of the time you have to demonstrate that ability, that you are capable of absorbing the resources in the best way possible. Now, how can you do that? You need to work with somebody who has had that experience. And how can you do that again? Go online, for example, research for universities, think tanks, globally that are working in the areas that you're working in, reach out to them. And for example, if we tend to want to have organizations link up with organizations, universities in Canada. So you could say, well, I'm working on soil science in Africa, and I'm going to link up with an organization, look up on who's doing soil science in Canada. And most of the time, the senior researchers are willing to reach out and work with the young scholars. And that is one pathway that you can use. Tagging yourself in terms of participating in the conferences, writing the blogs. You start from the small projects, blogs, proposals for small funds, 10, 15,000 and going onwards. The other approach that we encourage our researchers, young researchers, to take on is tag yourself to a project. Say, for example, University of Ibadan has won a project with IDRC, and you're a young scholar who's just finished your master's or so. Join it as a research assistant, as a PhD scholar, or for purposes of capacity building. And then through the circles, through the different steps, you get to climb the ladder to the higher levels. Remember, it's not usually possible for you to go from step 1 to step 10. You must go through step 1 to. If I recall my own experience after graduation, I was competing for research projects with ARIN, PEP, and so on. And these were small grants, $5,000, $10,000. But after some time, I moved on now to bigger projects, 50,000, 100,000. And by then, I was now partnering with leading scholars globally, who, of course, were my mentors, and rather than competitors. So it's always important to see that, leverage that advantage of being mentored rather than competing. On the issue of rejections are very demoralizing. And many times we write proposals and we don't even get feedback. You've submitted a proposal, is sometimes acknowledged, yes, we've received, you wait for 1 year, nothing comes up. I should say that a rejection should not be demoralizing. I think it should be a learning experience if you are especially able to get comments. In IDRC, usually for those that go through first, second stage, we tend to send back comments to the researchers. So look at these comments and use them as a stepping stone for your next proposal. But at times, I have witnessed proposals or projects where it's a potentially good proposal. It's listed as fundable, but has not been approved. So you send 5 pages of comments to the researcher, and they say, to hell, I'm not writing, I'm not responding to this, because of the comments. But the comments are meant to support you. The rejection at that point is not necessarily a discouragement, but it's because some people, the reviewers, have probably seen some weakness in your proposal and are asking you to revisit it. We've had cases where out of 20 proposals, we found 10, and we say the remaining 10 are bankable as in potentially good. So those who address the comments tend to be called back and say, okay, your proposal was selected, not funded, but now we think we have additional resources to fund this project. And if you have worked on the comments, it can help you improve. But many times, again, as a young researcher with high ambition, 5 pages of comments, to hell, I'm not wasting my time with this. I have moved on. But you never know, because the next step, again, you'll be meeting the same person or next reviewer in terms of that. So, of course, there could be biases sometimes that we think there are biases. My proposal was excellent, but it was rejected. Most of the times we have teams of reviewers. So we tend to bring in our experts from different areas. And by the time your proposal is rejected, then you know that something is not very strong. Like I say, it could be rejected based on a budget. We are saying you have a budget of 1 million and you're saying 800,000 is meant to go and pay salaries. Then what will you use for the research? 200,000. Who's going to fund you for that? No one is going to give you 200,000 for research and 800,000 for salaries. So those are the kind of things that we look out for. Somebody says we're putting a budget, we want to buy a car, Prado for this project. Who's going to fund you in this era for such activities? No, somebody who says we will implement this project and 50% of the resources will go into implementation-based activities, tend to get more focus. So that's how you handle rejections. To me, they should not be demoralizing, but they should be more motivating for you to think deeper.
Thank you so much, Dr. Okwi, for your response. Paul, do you have a follow-up question on that? I saw Margaret also had a question.
Okay, then let's pick it from him first. But Doc, thanks so much for that. I have a follow-up question. So you pick it from the other colleague.
No. We can do your follow-up question, then we'll go to Margaret. So please go ahead.
Doc, it's in connection with the format for proposals. Normally, you need to have your topic, your introduction or background. You state your problem. You try to, justify it. In terms of justification, we are looking at the gaps which you have identified and then bridging it. Then you come with a methodology, and then you have maybe a section for expected outputs, and then also you have your budget, and if there is, maybe references. But in your submission, you clearly indicated that there should be other components. For example, IDRC, you are looking at gender, you are looking at other important things. So how do you bring them into the proposal? Do you create sub-teams in the proposal? Do you create sub-teams and then highlight them so that they stand out in the proposal? Or how is it going to be? Because I'm just trying to look at how you create more teams, sub-teams within the proposal to capture all these. For example, apart from the gender, you also talked about impact, you talked about monitoring and evaluation. How do you do it? I don't know if I'm clear. I don't know if I'm clear in that.
You're clear. I was waiting for the second question.
Margaret, please go ahead.
Yes, thank Dr. Okwi for such an informative session and highlighting some of the key areas we face, those of us from academia, when we try to write proposals for the development world. But there's also this notion that goes around that sometimes you submit your proposal and it's just an ideation or an agenda building process for the funders. So then they take the proposals, they don't get back to those who wrote them, and then you end up having somebody else implementing other people's ideas. So how have you gone through this, or have you ever heard of such kind of allegations? So sometimes you just feel that somebody is implementing a project somewhere, but you feel this was really my idea, which I submitted, but was never funded. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. Let me start with the first question. On the format for proposal submission. Various organizations have their different modalities for formats for submission of proposals. But if you recall, when I started this talk, I said, first things first, go into the organization's profile and look up what kind of organization are they? Who are they? What do they emphasize? What are their strengths? Then once you know those traits of the organization, by the time you begin to put together your proposal, you know that, for example, ARIN is strong in climate change. They focus on transition to low carbon energy or whatever it is, or clean water. Now, that is a jargon that you go back and pick and say, if I am to catch the eye of somebody in this organization. I am not going to miss out talking about our capacity to transition to clean energy, our capacity for clean water, or whatever it is, or for gender. So those are things you pick from the background documents about the organization. But to be specific, different organizations have different templates. So most of the time, they will say call for proposals, and this is the template that you will be given. For us in IDRC, usually we do that. We give you a template with guiding questions. Please present the context, the background about your organization, who you are, how you intend to influence policy, your methodology, your stakeholders. We will ask you all those questions. So sometimes you're simply responding to those questions, and you find that your proposal comes out very well if it is specific and responding to the issues. But there are others that will sometimes not give you that. They'll simply say, we are looking for 5-page proposal, 300 words talking about investments in a particular area. Again, the things that sell out to me are what is the problem you're trying to address, and how are you addressing it, and how usable is it? Once you do the what, the how, for whom, and the where, some of those questions are very specific. Like I say, if you're doing a research proposal for ILRI, for example, most of the time they will want to see the presence of livestock research in it at some point. So unless it is specific, if it's not specified, somebody who does work on semi-arid pastoral systems or whatever it is, go back to the context of the organization, do the research, you will be able to find how to integrate those aspects of the gender impact and the rest. On the second question, people's ideas being taken up and used in different cases. Well, I have heard about that, but as far as I know, within IDRC, I don't think we do that, because we don't implement. We simply fund research projects. But for your idea to be taken up by an organization and used, it really points to the lack of professionalism in the organization. There would be very rarely, unless it is a consultancy firm, that would do that. But a funding organization would hardly come up with pick on an idea presented by a researcher and then not fund that researcher and give it to somebody else for purposes. I find it sometimes defeatist. Some researchers use it, but it's a defeatist approach to say, I have submitted 10 proposals, but you see the topic that I submitted is similar to what Leah presented, and Leah was funded. How sure are you that Leah did not review some of the works that you reviewed and came up with a better idea? We are not sure, but if you are able to validate that, then maybe yes, but it's very rare, I can say from the funder's side, that ideas are picked up, stolen, and funded in different ways. I know research consultancies that can do that. They would ask you, Margaret, give me your CV, use it, get the project, and never involve you. That happens. But for research ideas, it's difficult. But in a way also, I cannot say 100% that the ideas are never utilized. In most cases, IDRC would, for instance, in our case, would come back to you and say, first, please acknowledge that we can share this proposal. At the time you're signing the submission, you acknowledge that your proposal can be shared with other researchers for purposes of knowledge translation or knowledge sharing. So that is the document that you will most likely sign before you submit your proposal. Number two, when your idea is not funded and it is thought out that it was a potentially fundable one, by the time we come back to think about it as a potential area, we often get back to you and say, Margaret, you submitted an excellent idea. Would you like to continue with it? And if so, there are weaknesses or strengths. Could you partner with another person who has a comparative advantage in a different area and put this idea into something better? That's what I usually see. But I have not seen cases where ideas are stolen and used to be funded by others. That is dishonesty. I hope I've answered, Margaret. It could happen, but I'm not aware of that.
Lack of professionalism. Very well, Dr. There's a question in the chat. I'll just take another round of questions. So the question in the chat says, how does an organization know that they have been blacklisted from IDRC, for example? Does IDRC communicate such information to the organization? That is from Gaudensia. And then I'll give Mildred an opportunity to ask her question, and followed by Vera Otiende. Please go ahead, Mildred.
Thank you, Leah. Good evening, everyone. I think I'm excited to meet all of you. And thank you, Paul, for really giving us a very good presentation this afternoon. Okay, the question I have, Paul, regards the idea related to our institutions. For instance, if I'm a researcher, a young researcher, the complications that we get, for instance, you find, okay, you have applied, and then there's a project that needs to be implemented. As you say, sometimes when you are giving to, say, places like South Africa, you don't need to chase after them. But you see, in our Kenyan scenario, for instance, you find that at times the money has to come through the institution, and then you have to access it through the financial system of this institution. And it becomes, I think, very difficult to meet the deadlines. For example, if you have maybe an activity that needs to run, and then you're chasing money for, say, 2-3 months, you see you lag behind. But you see, now this puts you on a blacklist. The institution also is blacklisted. So I think I don't know how we can handle this, or how some of these donors can handle it, if they can maybe have some memorandum of understanding with the institutions, so that money that is basically for research is actually handled differently, and it's not pegged upon the university program of finances. The other question I have is about us young researchers. You find that you're informing us that we need maybe to look at maybe some of the programs that are running, for example, IDRC, different organizations. And you find, like, for example, if you're looking for a postdoc, I'm looking for a postdoc, and some of the organizations or some of the fellowships require you maybe to have a mentor, a professor in the area, so that you need to work a proposal in conjunction with the professor. And it becomes sometimes very difficult. Of course, we need to do the conferences, yes, but sometimes you see there are limitations. You're working, you are actually also trying to look for the grants to fund your research. I think, how can young researchers overcome this? Thank you.
Vera, please go ahead. Thank you, Mildred.
Okay, thanks so much, Leah. Thanks so much, Paul, for the insights you're sharing. Maybe just as a follow-up question to what Mildred has asked, ordinarily as researchers, where you sit when you write a proposal, the back of your mind, it's fundable until you get a regret or a success. But sometimes what people don't realize, especially for early career researchers, is that the skills, or rather the scholarly voice that research institutions or rather funding bodies would want to experience is what always pins them down. In other words, they don't really have the kind of language or the kind of oomph that would really excite a funder or something of the kind. So what I wanted to ask here is, do you normally have some kind of workshops or trainings as IDRC specifically to early career researchers on how to actually enhance the scholarly voice as they write for funding, for support and such like things, because I think that kind of training or matching or mentorship is really necessary for better funding, because I mean most research are fundable except they don't sound. Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
over to you, Dr.
All right, let me respond to this. Thank you. Very tough questions sometimes. Now, I'll begin with the blacklisting. How does an organization know that they've been blacklisted for example, IDRC or World Bank or whoever? And do they communicate this information to the organization? Yes, many times the information is communicated. For example, how do you get blacklisted? I will not name, but let me call it University X. University X was given funding to implement a project, a research project. University X did not deliver a single output, but was given 70, 80% of the funding, and did not account for the money, neither did they submit a project. So we usually work with the lead of the organization. So that University X, the lead would be the Vice Chancellor. So we would reach out to the Vice Chancellor formally after exhausting all the channels to write and say, your university was granted this amount of money for this project. It's now 10 years since this was implemented or initiated. To date, we don't have, and therefore, we are closing this project. We would initiate a refund of the money, but many times it's never done. So until you satisfy us that you can deliver a project that is a good project based on what we gave you in the past, you will not be able to access monies from IDRC or from the organization. That letter usually goes out. It usually goes out. That is the more direct one. But there is the indirect one where you submit proposals, you give work which is below standard, completely below standard. You are blacklisted in quotes, because how we simply say, okay, if you give money to University Y, what you're going to get is not going to be something of good use. You will be told your outputs are not good. You will submit proposals, but you may never get the projects funded. So you may ask yourself why, but because you don't look back to the past. So I've seen universities, for example, think tanks come back even after 5 years, 10 years to say, yes, we failed in the past, but here is the output of that project that we thought we had failed on. Here is the book that we published 10 years down the road, never too late. And they redeemed their image. That I've seen it happen. Remember, funders are usually networked. I work here, I collaborate with the USA, I collaborate with the Swedes, with several other funders. So if I have a proposal a problem with ARIN, many times by the time Rockefeller, for example, comes out with a call, sometimes they reach out to us and say, you have worked with so and so. What is your experience? Behind the scenes, I'll say, excellent, not excellent, try your luck, or otherwise. So that's where the blacklisting comes up. You may not sometimes know it, but it happens. On the issue of the funding channels, the due diligence is usually done on the organizations as well. So misuse of resources is typical with our organizations in the South. There are some excellent ones, but universities, I should say, have issues, major issues. And you're right, Mildred. For example, to use an example, maybe University of Nairobi would not be comparable with the Strathmore University because of the way they are set up. University of Nairobi is very bureaucratic. the processes of management of resources have to go through different processes. Strathmore University, being a private sector-led university, is more straight to the point. When they say somebody's managing project funds, that person is straight on to the point. So what usually we do is we do institutional profiling, institutional reviews, due diligence on the capacity of the institution before you're given money. And we rate these institutions, high risk, medium risk, and low risk. So a low risk organization, for example, will be allowed to report once a year. You're given money and you're told, submit your financials once a year, your technical reports once a year. Medium risk, 6 months. High risk, 3 months. Why? Because the risks are very high. After 3 months, the organization might have disappeared. They could have moved from Nairobi, they're now in Mozambique. You never get them, or the guy has just switched off his phone, so whatever it is. So we usually do this due diligence, and they use that to rate organizations and whether you'll be given money at certain rates. On the aspect of the young researchers, how do you overcome restrictions to exposure? First caveat is that developing your profile, your reputation as a researcher takes time. It's not something you can achieve overnight. We come up with very good ambitions, very brilliant ideas. But I can just give you a scenario, for example. We had a review of proposals a year or two ago, and some young researchers who had just finished their PhDs came up with very nice proposal, but didn't have institutional tagging or evidence to show that they can implement the research. But you could really see these are very noble ideas. And then there were the seniors who came up with modest ideas, but had a long track record of delivery of useful, important, applicable, applied work. If you're doing the assessment, many times you look and say, excellent idea, you look at the resources as well. If it is $500,000, for example, say, okay, do I risk $500,000 on this young fellow who has an excellent idea but has never implemented it? Or do I go with a modest guy who has implemented and has delivered? If I decide to go with the young researcher, then most of the time I will say, Mr., Mrs., or young researcher, can you find a good partnering kind of mentor to work with you, who we can be able to know that you will be able to go with along the journey, the research journey. So sometimes it's just about the trust. It's like you cannot put all the funds in one basket you're seeing for the first time. Those are things we weigh, but that's on a case-by-case basis. So how do you overcome this? Like I said, number one, for example, the track record of your publications would show. So publish, start from, you don't have to aim for the real top end journals from the day you graduate. Start from the medium rated journals as you climb the stairs. You will see that people begin to trust your work as you move on. Number two is these days we have lots of media, LinkedIn, ResearchGate, and all that. Put your works out there. Those works usually are read by people. If I see Leah has submitted a proposal, I can check there and see what kind of work has she done before. If it is for the first time that she's giving an excellent proposal, there will be a question mark. Why? These days, people hire people to write proposals. So I go to a research bureau in town, they do an excellent proposal, I put it there. When it comes to implementation, you're not there. So I think those are some of the media that we use and we have done this through, I'm sorry, Leah, the final bit of it. We've had capacity building initiatives for young researchers, but we don't do it directly as IDRC. We fund organizations that help us with that. Good examples are like the African Economic Research Consortium. We give them money and they use that money to train young researchers on proposal writing, on research methodology, or whatever it is. I know of recent, they did one targeting young women, writing proposals for young women. And it was basically fresh graduates from university. They have done on gender specific ones and so on. So we support that, but as projects through capacity building organizations.
All right, thank you so much, Daktari. I see, Paul, you have a question. Let me just take the last two questions. So, Paul, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Doc. Mine has to do with when there's no call for proposal, you have a brilliant idea, you have something, a concept you want to get funding for. Is it possible to write directly to a funding agency when even though there hasn't been any call for proposal? Is it a good practice to do that?
Yes, Paul, very, very good practice, very right. Remember, the people who are seated on the other side of the table are people like you. And sometimes we run out of ideas. So if Paul sends me a proposal and I see an emerging theme that is potentially impactful, definitely I'll pick it up. And that's why I talked to you about the unsolicited proposals. In the past, we used to do lots of unsolicited proposals where, for example, you would write to me, write to IDRC, just drop an email to info.idrc and say, there is a case of drought in a particular area and we feel this is affecting children most. We want to investigate this. What do you think? If it falls within the area of research funding for that organization, they will definitely reach out to you. And some of the times, it's not that your proposal will be what will be funded. You will work through to develop the proposal. Like I said, this used to be our modality. We used to get proposals from all over Africa with different thematic areas, but we tailor them first to address the context, but also to link to address our strategic intentions, our strategic objectives. So it's very okay for you to develop a concept and share it. But my advice is do not put too much time into developing a very long proposal. Most funders, like I said, are overworked, are very busy, very stressed people. So if you bring 5 pages, the chances that I'll read the 5 pages are really very low. So do a 1-pager or 2-pager maximum, but 1-pager is where you start from. Then I will be able to tell you, good idea, we can think about it, or bad idea, let's shelve it. So that's my advice. Never write a long proposal and expect it to be read fully. Start with a 1-2-pager and use that.
All right.
There is, sorry, one question from Rosemary. That is, do research institutions work closely with statistics office? Yes, we do. And we work very closely with policymakers as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Okwi. Being precise and concise is really the key to a good proposal amongst other ingredients that you have mentioned. At this moment, I'd just like to invite Dr. Johannes, if he's with us, to give his remarks even as we close the webinar. Thank you so much. Dr. Johannes, please.
Thank you. A very good, thank you, Leah. And okay, to put my, yeah, good. So I was, just going to say very good thank you, Leah, and to Paul for this really wonderful session. I think some of the things that, some of the insights that you've given, Paul, are actually, for many donors, there is always the assumption that people know about them, that researchers know about them. And especially when you think about the African early career researchers who are really learning through these processes of submitting competitive grants. So this was really very useful because then some of these issues have been unpacked. And the question that I think Paul has asked at the end, that is it possible to provide some ideas or proposal if, outside the course? And I think that is also one thing that I would want to also stress, because I think IDRC, from the interactions I've had, is doing excellent work around that. And because that is how you encourage thought leadership, so that ideas which are innovative and really, can go into being considered for funding, who can really be path-breaking in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of policy impact, capacity, but also bringing new things in place, are able to get a space in the donor consideration. And I want to say this is really a very innovative part of the process. So for many African young scholars, I'm very much aware that in most of the platforms we've shared and engaged with you, there are a lot of innovative ideas that are existing. There are a lot of really very interesting experiences, which then could fit some of the key principles, the key sort of criteria that Paul has outlined in terms of competitive proposal. But I think still, the ability to put these ideas into a very clear sort of format is still very low. So it isn't really my plea that from the Africa Research and Impact Network, as we try to create a space where we can have these conversations, because I think this is what has been lacking historically, this conversation where, we could understand, what are the opportunities. And as we build the next generation of African research leaders who are actually going to take up most of the challenges that this continent might be facing in the research, but also in the policy realm, I would really be, very encouraged or happy if we could have a lot of these dedicated sessions of discussions around some of these issues. And as I think Vera asked, whether there are trainings or some support programs, I think this is something that also would be very, very useful if you think about strengthening the African leadership in terms of intellectual thinking, but also in terms of the presentation of thoughts. And I want to also thank the IDRC so much, because I think IDRC is one of the founders who are very keen on African scholars. It is mainly IDRC that most of the proposals or projects can be led, by the African scholar. You can be a PI. Most of the funds, I'm not saying they're relevant, but most of the fundings, there is always the caveat that the leadership of a particular project, a project proposal, has to be from maybe a developed country context to from where the funding is coming from, which has actually been a major problem, because then it impedes and it makes the capacity, the capability, the leadership development for African scholars in this particular space to be really very, to be very problematic. So I think this is really a good progress, and I hope that we will continue to engage with you, Paul, and of course the wider IDRC fraternity in pushing some of these agendas. If we have at least 1 or 2 or 3 proposals from this group, funded because of this competency and well implemented with good impact, that is a kind of a case that for me would be very good to look at. So again, from the African Research and Impact Network, I want to take this opportunity to again thank you, Paul. We've worked very well, and there are many other areas we are continuing to work together. And I think together we are going to really make some great transformation and learning in this process. So thank you so much. So allow me also to thank the participants who have been really very engaging, a lot of questions, and from the questions you could really judge that there is really a gap, and we need to really create more of these spaces in a more dedicated, more focused, more targeted, and in a more transformative fashion. And I also want to thank Leah. Thank you for the great moderation, and the team for all that you've put into this, and you continue to do so. So we have these dialogues on a monthly basis, and so I invite you really to check on some of the upcoming topics, and also to give us feedback in terms of how can we make these spaces better. And these are dialogues we do. They're not funded dialogues, so it is part of that element of creating a framework for sustaining knowledge within the continent without necessarily really depending so much on funds. So that for me is transformative when you think about sustainability of ideas, thought processes, and research impact. And with those very few remarks, I want to say thank you and have a good afternoon.
Daktari, thank you so much, Daktari. Thank you so much. I'll just request us to open our video so that we can take a quick picture for memory, and yeah, just a quick nice picture.
Yeah.
We can just turn on our videos.
12:32.
Yeah.
Leah, are you helping us with that? Thank you. I can see Paul from Ghana. Thank you. Really nice to see all of you. Haron, are we set? Are we done? Okay, so a nice picture has been taken. Be sure to follow us on our social media pages. I have been your moderator, Leah Aoko from ARIN. Thank you so much, Dr. Okwi, and thank you to all participants. See you in the next month's webinar series. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Good afternoon. Bye.
Bye.